Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Underwater Intelligence Hypothesis. The year is 2004. Your commander David Fravor, 18 years of fighter combat experience behind you, flying an FA-18F Super Hornet 50 miles off the coast of San Diego on what should be a routine training mission. Your radio crackles. The USS Princeton, the carrier strike group's most sophisticated combat vessel, wants you to investigate something. Not a surface target, not another aircraft. For 2 weeks, the Princeton's Spy-1 radar system, the most advanced shipboard radar in the United States Navy, has been tracking objects descending from 60,000 feet to sea level in under 1 second. Objects that hover, then submerge. They want you to find out what it is. What you find is hovering 40 feet above the ocean surface. White, oblong, roughly 40 feet long, no wings. No exhaust ports, no visible propulsion system of any kind. The ocean directly beneath it churns in a 100-foot circle of agitated white water, as if something is pulling fluid upward from below. When you initiate a descent toward the object, it mirrors your approach vector exactly. Then, in the time it takes your instruments to register the movement, it accelerates away. Your wing commander's FLIR targeting pod catches the departure on infrared video. Your hands are still on the controls when the airspace where it was is simply empty. Aerospace engineers who later analyzed that footage estimated the departure speed at approximately 4,800 miles per hour. The fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built, the SR-71 Blackbird, tops out at 2,200 miles per hour. This isn't a fringe claim from anonymous witnesses. On April 27, 2020, the United States Department of Defense officially declassified and released 3 videos of UAP encounters by U.S. Navy pilots, including the 2004 Nimitz incident. In 2021, a preliminary assessment from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence confirmed the recorded encounters could not be attributed to conventional aviation, known adversary drone programs, or atmospheric phenomena. The Pentagon's own UAP task force documented the objects demonstrating what they called advanced acceleration and hypersonic velocity with zero acoustic signature. Here's the specific detail that most coverage skipped. After the TicTac object departed Commander Fravor's visual range, the USS Princeton reacquired it on radar at a prearranged combat air patrol rendezvous 0.60 miles away. That waypoint was a classified operational coordinate, not transmitted on open frequencies. The object covered 60 miles in roughly 60 seconds, then it submerged. The Princeton's radar tracked it descending into the Pacific Ocean at a location where the depth exceeds 18,000 feet. Whatever it was didn't escape. It went down. Commander Fravor testified before Congress under oath in July 2023. He stated the object demonstrated no propulsion physics consistent with any aerospace system he'd encountered in 18 years of naval aviation. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence Christopher Mellon testified the same year that the pattern of behavior, specifically the ocean entry and apparent continued operation below the surface, suggests the objects may use the deep ocean as a staging or base. Environment. Mellon wasn't speaking as a theorist. He was a former senior intelligence official reporting what documented institutional data shows. The mainstream explanation covers the aerial component adequately enough. Advanced adversary drones could explain an oblong object without visible propulsion. Radar software bugs occasionally generate anomalous returns. Atmospheric ducting creates phantom radar targets. Experienced pilots under stress can misidentify unusual natural phenomena. But these explanations don't extend to the underwater component. No known drone technology allows ocean entry at high speed without catastrophic structural failure. The fastest submarine ever built, the Soviet K-222 titanium-hulled nuclear attack submarine, achieved a top submerged speed of 44.7 knots, roughly 51 miles per hour. The Princeton tracked the TicTac descending into the ocean at velocities incompatible with any known submersible in any nation's inventory. Multiple independent sensor systems confirmed the same data simultaneously: shipborne radar, airborne FLIR camera, and direct visual observation by at least 4 trained naval aviators. Sensor artifacts don't appear consistently across unconnected platforms operated by separate crews. In November 2014, the Chilean Navy documented a parallel incident. A naval helicopter crew filmed 9 minutes of infrared footage of an unidentified object flying at 4,500 feet before accelerating to the ocean surface and entering the water. Chilean military analysts examined the footage for 2 years before officially releasing it in 2017. Their published conclusion described it as unidentified, inconsistent with any known aircraft or drone technology, and most anomalous, specifically in its ocean entry behavior. The United States Navy's unclassified incident reporting between 2014 and 2021 logged 143 confirmed UAP encounters, the majority occurring over open ocean. The number involving apparent ocean entry remains classified. In 2019, the Navy updated its reporting procedures to allow pilots to document UAP encounters without career risk, an institutional acknowledgement that the incidents were real, consistent, and required systematic tracking. We have mapped approximately 5% of Earth's ocean floor with meaningful resolution. The remaining 95% sits in darkness at an average depth of 12,100 feet, uninvestigated and beyond current technology to survey comprehensively. At those depths, under pressures that collapse standard steel casings, in permanent darkness, structures of considerable scale would be completely invisible to us. What is it that enters our oceans at 4,800 miles per hour and goes somewhere 18,000 feet down? Where does it go when it gets there? How long has it been going there? And why, of all the places on Earth to base something, did it choose the 95% of our planet we've never looked at? Number 2. The bloop. The summer of 1997. You're monitoring the readout from NOAA's Equatorial Pacific Ocean Autonomous Hydrophone Array, a network of underwater microphones originally deployed to track nuclear detonation signatures and repurposed for ocean science. After the Cold War ended, the system scans frequencies from 1 to 100 hertz, the ultra-low range where acoustic events travel farthest through deep water. You've heard this data for months. Whale song, ship propellers, the subsonic rumble of deep ocean currents. You know what everything sounds like. Then, for approximately 1 minute, the system flags an amplitude it hasn't flagged before. The signal triangulates to the South Pacific. The system is telling you it detected this from 3,000 miles away, simultaneously, on multiple stations. The sound was later named the bloop. It's an ultra-low frequency signal with a rising pitch profile starting low and sweeping upward before terminating. NOAA's Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Hydrophone Monitoring Network detected it simultaneously from stations 3,000 miles apart in multiple directions, which required the source to be producing a sound of enormous amplitude. NOAA's own analysis at the time, led by Dr. Christopher Fox at the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory, estimated that the source would need to be far louder than any known biological sound source in the ocean. Here's the number that matters. Blue whales are the loudest animals on Earth. Their low-frequency vocalizations register at approximately 180 decibels at source and can be detected hundreds of miles away. That's the biological acoustic ceiling. As understood, in 1997, the product of an animal weighing up to 200 tons that evolved specifically to communicate across ocean basins. The bloop was detected coherently from 3,000 miles. For a sound to be heard clearly at that distance, the source needs to substantially exceed what a blue whale produces. Either the bloop came from something significantly larger than a blue whale, or from something producing sound with an efficiency that exceeds any known biological mechanism. Dr. Fox's initial analysis noted that the bloop's frequency profile resembled the architecture of biological sound. Biological vocalizations have complex, non-repeating frequency sweeps, with subtle variations across the duration of the call. Geological events, earthquakes, ice fractures tend to produce simpler, more mechanically consistent acoustic signatures. The bloop's rising tone profile was, in Dr. Fox's assessment, more consistent with a biological source than with a geological one. The mainstream explanation came from NOAA itself in 2005. Their official position is that the bloop was most likely an icequake, an acoustic event produced by large Antarctic ice masses fracturing or calving under their own weight. Cryoseisms can be extraordinarily loud. The geographic source point of the bloop places it within range of Antarctic ice zone acoustic transmission pathways. NOAA considered the matter resolved, but the cryoseism explanation has a specific problem. Antarctic icequakes produce sounds consistent with sudden mechanical stress in ice, a cracking, grinding acoustic signature with a different frequency profile from the bloop's rising tone sweep. The rising pitch pattern that Dr. Fox identified as biologically characteristic is not documented in known cryoseism recordings. Ice fractures with a mechanical sound. It doesn't sweep upward in pitch over the course of a minute. The sound NOAA recorded in 1997 does. The bloop is also not isolated. NOAA's hydrophone network captured multiple other unexplained ultra-low frequency sounds through the 1990s. Julia, recorded in 1999, was a 15-second sound of similar amplitude and unknown origin. Train, recorded in 1997, is a continuous low-frequency sound detected periodically with no confirmed source. Slowdown, also 1997, is a descending tone in the eastern Pacific that remains unexplained. Upsweep has been recorded intermittently since 1991 from a fixed South Pacific point, still unresolved. Each was captured by the same network. Each remains officially open. There is one more detail. The bloop's triangulated source point sits approximately 1,240 miles from the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, the most remote point in the ocean. In 1928, American horror writer H.P. Lovecraft published The Call of Cthulhu, placing a fictional sunken city called R'lyeh at approximately 47 degrees south, 126 degrees west. Lovecraft had no geodetic software. The oceanic pole of inaccessibility wasn't mathematically calculated until 1992. Yet Lovecraft's fictional city sits 849 miles from the most remote coordinates on Earth, in the same South Pacific sector where NOAA recorded its most anomalous sound 69 years later. Nobody can explain how Lovecraft ended up there. What produced a sound in 1997 that exceeded the amplitude of a blue whale and matched the frequency architecture of biological vocalization? What are the other unresolved sounds on NOAA's network? Julia, Train, Slowdown, Upsweep, and why has none of them been definitively explained? Why did H.P. Lovecraft place his fictional sunken city in the same region of the South Pacific that turns out to be both the most isolated ocean point on Earth and the approximate source of the largest unexplained acoustic event NOAA has ever recorded? And if the bloop was ice, why does ice sound biological? Number 3. Megalodon. You're aboard a research vessel processing a sediment core sample from the western Pacific floor, running through standard cataloging procedure, when someone holds up a tooth. It looks like a fossil, dark, massive. The serrated edges still defined enough to catch light, except the manganese crust encasing it is wrong. Fossilization in the deep Pacific produces manganese oxide coatings at a known, measurable rate. The accretion on this tooth is consistent with an age of approximately 11,000 years. The official extinction date of the creature that produced it is 3.6 million years ago. Someone checks the catalog. These teeth were dredged in 1959 by the HMS Challenger survey vessel from the floor of the Pacific. 2 of them, one with a manganese accretion dating to approximately 24,000 years, one to approximately 11,000. The finding sat in the scientific literature. Undiscussed. Megalodon was the largest predatory shark in Earth's history. Estimates, based on tooth size and body proportion scaling, put it at 50 to 65 feet long, weighing between 50 and 70 tons, with jaws approximately 9 feet wide and teeth reaching 7 inches in length. The official extinction date of 3.6 million years ago is based on where the fossil record stops producing megalodon teeth in significant concentrations. After that point, the assumption is that remaining specimens are reworked fossils, ancient teeth, displaced from older sediment and redeposited in younger material. The manganese dating of the 1959 HMS Challenger teeth complicates that assumption directly. Manganese accretion dating is a standard geochemical method for aging deep-sea objects. A manganese crust consistent with 11,000 years doesn't come from a 3.6 million-year-old tooth lying passively in sediment. Manganese accumulation would be far more extensive by then. Either the dating method is wrong, or the tooth was shed approximately 11,000 years ago by a living animal. The researchers who published the finding didn't claim Megalodon was alive. They published the data. Nobody allocated funding to follow up. Here is the precedent that changes the framework. In December 1938, a museum curator named Marjorie Courtenay-Latimer in East London, South Africa, was examining a catch from a local fishing trawler when she found a fish she didn't recognize. Blue-gray, heavily scaled, with lobed fins resembling limbs rather than standard fish fins. She had it identified by naturalist J. L. B. Smith. The species was Latimeria chalumnae, the coelacanth. It had been classified as extinct for 65 million years. Every textbook in existence at the time agreed it was gone. The physical specimen in her museum was alive. The coelacanth was subsequently found thriving in undisturbed deep-water populations off Indonesia and the Comoros Islands. The scientific community had declared it extinct for 65 million years and was simply wrong. The relevant question isn't whether Megalodon is definitely alive. The relevant question is whether the evidence for its extinction is more solid than the evidence for coelacanth's extinction was in 1937. On the basis of the deep ocean, it isn't. We have explored approximately 5% of the ocean floor. The deep scattering layer, a massive band of marine biomass between 650 and 3,300 feet that descends below the range of most survey technology at night, represents a concentration of life in conditions we barely monitor. Megalodon's prey species, large baleen whales, exist in significant numbers in the current ocean. The nutrients, the depth, and the darkness that would allow a large predator to persist undetected are all present in the unexplored 95%. Sperm whale carcasses recovered in the Atlantic and Pacific over the past 3 decades have occasionally presented bite wounds with circular radii exceeding 15 inches in diameter, larger than any mark attributable to great white sharks, orcas, or any other confirmed living predator. These bite marks are documented in published marine biology literature. The conclusion in each paper is carefully worded: unknown cause, not megalodon. Unknown, because unknown is what the evidence actually supports, and unknown is not the same as absent. The mainstream position is solid on its surface. The fossil record shows a clear decline in megalodon tooth frequency corresponding to Pliocene ocean cooling and prey species shifts. Modern sonar and underwater survey technology should detect an animal of that size in monitored, coastal, and mid-depth zones. No confirmed sighting has been photographed or physically documented. Absence of evidence in surveyed waters is meaningful evidence of absence, but the surveyed waters at accessible depths represent a fraction of the ocean's volume. The dark water column below 3,300 feet, where continuous survey doesn't operate, constitutes most of the ocean by volume. We wouldn't expect to find a deep-dwelling megalodon in zones we monitor for the same reason we didn't find coelacanths in shallow reef surveys. They were in the water we weren't looking at. Why have the 1959 HMS Challenger teeth never been followed up with a funded investigation? What's producing bite radii on recovered whale carcasses that exceed every known living predator's jaw geometry? What would it take, what physical evidence would have to surface for the scientific community to reassess an extinction it declared in conditions of 95% unexplored ocean? And when the coelacanth turned up alive after 65 million years of confident extinction, did anyone ask what else they'd missed? Number 4. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. June 2011. You're aboard the Ocean X Team research vessel somewhere between Sweden and Finland, staring at a side-scan sonar readout as the device maps the seafloor below. The team, led by commercial treasure hunters Peter Lindberg and Dennis Asberg, has been combing this stretch of the Baltic looking for salvageable cargo from World War II-era shipwrecks. The sonar emits pulses downward, and maps returns as grayscale images. Rocks come up irregular and textured. Silt comes up smooth. The angular profile of a sunken hull comes up with a specific kind of hard edge. You've seen all of these. At 285 feet below the surface, the sonar shows you something it has no category for. You stare at it. Lindbergh stares at it. Nobody says anything for a moment. It's a perfect disk, approximately 200 feet across, elevated 26 feet off the surrounding seafloor. At the end of what the sonar image clearly shows as a 985-foot-long disturbed trail in the sediment, as if the object arrived there by moving across the bottom and coming to rest. The geometry is exact in a way natural seafloor features aren't. Circular, consistent diameter, raised profile indicating three-dimensional structure rather than a flat geological feature. Whatever this is, it didn't form in place. Something moved it there, and then it stopped. The Ocean X team returned in 2012 with remotely operated vehicles and human divers. The dive footage was released publicly. Divers reaching the object described a surface unlike any natural formation they had encountered in years of Baltic Sea salvage work. The material appeared black, hard, and sooty, resembling volcanic rock in texture, but inconsistent with Baltic Sea geology. The Baltic floor is dominated by glacial sediment, clay, and limestone formations deposited during and after the last ice age. Volcanic rock doesn't belong there, in that form, at that scale. Here's what the electronics technician on board documented. Within approximately 200 feet of the object, electronic equipment began malfunctioning. Satellite phones lost signal, cameras stopped operating. Diving equipment experienced functional failures at depth. When divers moved beyond 200 feet from the object, equipment resumed normal operation. This pattern repeated consistently across multiple dives, multiple pieces of equipment, and multiple operators. The Ocean X team documented and reported it publicly. No conventional explanation has been offered for localized, directional electronic interference from a static underwater formation. The top surface, examined by divers and ROV, contains a feature that has attracted the most sustained attention: a roughly 12-inch indentation or opening with geometric edges. Not a rounded erosion cavity. Angular. The sides of the structure show what one expedition diver described as stepped formations, a staircase-like profile of tiered surfaces descending from the elevated top. The overall sonar profile that circulated internationally shows what the Ocean X team called a mushroom-shaped broader upper section, narrower base. The mainstream geological explanation is a glacial moraine. During the last ice age, advancing and retreating glaciers deposited enormous quantities of debris across the Baltic Basin. These deposits can appear unusual on sonar. A circular moraine of unusual consistency could, theoretically, produce an image resembling what the Ocean X team captured. Swedish geologists, who reviewed the sonar data publicly, offered this interpretation: natural glacial deposition. Unusual, but not impossible. But moraines don't produce right angles. Glacial deposition is defined by its irregularity. Ice deposits material chaotically across varying distances and gradients, producing profiles that are fundamentally non-geometric. The 12-inch angular indentation at the top of the Baltic anomaly has no glacial mechanism that produces angular, geometric openings in circular stone features. The 985-foot drag trail is equally inconsistent with moraine formation, which places sediment in place rather than along a directed path of displacement. If this is a moraine, it's one that arrived from somewhere else along a straight line and has right angles on top. The Baltic Sea is not an obscure or unmapped body of water. It is an enclosed sea, surrounded by NATO member nations, intensively monitored for military, commercial, and scientific purposes. Sweden has active naval operations here. Multiple nations' hydrographic agencies have mapped the region. No official Swedish body, no NATO agency, and no independent scientific institution has conducted a formal investigation of the anomaly since the Ocean X team's discovery. The coordinates are known. The depth is accessible. The object is still there. Lindbergh has stated in interviews that no government authority has contacted the Ocean X team to conduct further study. That pattern object discovered, media coverage generated, institutional interest absent, is worth noting on its own terms. A 200-foot diameter structure with non-geological geometry, electronic interference properties, and a movement trail on the floor of a strategically significant European sea, accessible by standard dive equipment. And officially, the question of what it is has not been formally asked. What made that 985-foot trail across the Baltic seafloor? What produces localized electronic interference in a stationary underwater feature? Why does the geometry not fit glacial deposition? And why, in a sea surrounded by nations with the resources and access to investigate, has no government officially looked closer? Number 5. The Cuban Underwater City. The year is 2001. You're watching a sonar screen aboard a research vessel off the Guanajuatabibes Peninsula on the western tip of Cuba, and the image coming up from the ocean floor doesn't look like a seabed. The survey is a commercial contract Canadian company, Advanced digital communications, hired by the Cuban government to map territorial waters for potential resource extraction. Routine work. The sonar pulses downward. The screen begins returning geometry. Rectangular forms arranged in perpendicular lines. Elevated structures that the depth profile indicates are consistent in height. Symmetry. At 2,160 to 2,460 feet below the surface, something is distributed across the seafloor with the regularity of a built environment. You keep sweeping, the formations extend for approximately 2 square miles. Paul Weinswag and Pauline Zalitsky of Advanced Digital Communications had the data independently reviewed. What came back was not ambiguous. The structures showed consistent geometric regularity, right angles, parallel alignments, symmetrical arrangements that don't occur in natural geological deposition at this scale. The company conducted follow-up sonar sweeps. The images were consistent across multiple passes. In 2001 and 2002, they deployed remotely operated vehicles to record visual footage. What the ROV cameras transmitted back were blocks. Large, cut-surfaced blocks of stone arranged in formations suggesting walls, corridors, and elevated platforms. The footage was reviewed by independent analysts. Several described it as the most compelling evidence of underwater man-made structure they had encountered. The material composition is the detailed geological dismissal struggles most with. Preliminary analysis and ROV visual inspection indicated the primary stone at the site was granite. Granite does not belong on the ocean floor off western Cuba. Granite is an intrusive igneous rock formed by slow cooling of magma deep within continental crust. Under conditions of significant tectonic compression, it requires a geological environment that doesn't produce seafloor. Material. The Caribbean Basin's ocean floor is dominated by basalt, limestone, and marine sediment. Granite blocks in geometric arrangement at 2,200 feet depth in this region require an explanation for how continental crust material arrived at mid-ocean depth in those configurations. Natural seafloor geology does not account for it. Here's the timeline problem with the depth. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 18,000 years ago, global sea levels were roughly 390 to 420 feet lower than today. That would expose currently shallow coastal areas and allow them to be inhabited. It would not place 2,200-foot deep ocean floor at surface level. For the Cuban site to have been accessible as surface terrain, either the seafloor in this region was at a dramatically different elevation during some prior period, or the structure was built under conditions that predate the human civilization record by a very wide margin, or Cuba's complex tectonic history produced vertical movement in this specific seafloor region on geological timescales. Zalitsky gave interviews to the BBC and Reuters in 2001 and 2002. The story received significant international attention. National Geographic expressed interest and became involved in preliminary investigation of the follow-up ROV findings. Then, the coverage ended. National Geographic did not publish findings from the site. The Cuban government restricted independent, international access to the area. Zalitsky's requests for continued research access and funding were not accommodated. The site at 2,200 feet off Guanajuatabibes remained uninvestigated by any major oceanographic institution with the resources to survey it comprehensively. The mainstream geological explanation is defensible. Natural processes produce formations that can resemble architecture. Columnar basalt forms, striking geometric hexagonal patterns due to lava cooling physics. Submarine volcanic activity creates ridges, plateaus, and elevated features that read ambiguously on sonar. The Cuban site sits in a tectonically active region where unusual seafloor structures are not inherently anomalous. Visual identification of granite from ROV footage without physical sampling is uncertain. The geometric impression from sonar may reflect the survey team's interpretation. These are legitimate scientific cautions. But the formations covered 2 square miles in consistent arrangements. Natural processes that produce geometry tend to do so locally, and with the specific signature of their mechanism. Columnar basalt forms, hexagonal columns, not rectangular blocks in perpendicular arrangements over 2 miles of seafloor. The ROV footage was compelling enough to engage National Geographic. National Geographic's involvement was compelling enough to warrant follow-up. and then the access closed. Not because the site was debunked with a competing geological explanation, because access was restricted. That pattern matters independently of the evidence. The site was found during a legitimate commercial survey. The data was reviewed. International media covered it. A major scientific institution began investigating, and then the institutional process stopped, without producing either confirmation or formal refutation. That's not the pattern of a misidentification being corrected by better data. That's the pattern of something that became unavailable for examination. What's at 2,200 feet off the western tip of Cuba? Why did National Geographic go quiet after showing interest in the ROV footage? How did granite blocks end up in geometric arrangement on a Caribbean seafloor where granite has no natural mechanism to form? And why, when a site like this is discovered in internationally accessible waters and investigated by credentialed researchers, does the formal scientific response amount to silence? Number 6. The Yonaguni Monument. The year is 1987. Yor Kihachiro Aratake, a dive tour operator who has spent years in the water off Yonaguni Island, the westernmost point of Japan. You're working the seafloor at about 60 feet, searching the area for hammerhead sharks to show to recreational divers. The seafloor here is sandstone and limestone, irregular and natural the way seafloors are. You turn a corner of an underwater ridge. What you find on the other side makes you stop swimming. Extending beneath you is a terraced stone formation, flat surfaces, parallel edges, perpendicular corners arranged in a geometric order that you have never encountered in years of diving this water. A series of broad stepped platforms descending from a height of approximately 90 feet to the sandy floor, each level flat and precise, each face close to vertical. You go back for a camera. What you photograph will divide scientists and archaeologists for nearly 4 decades. The Yonaguni Monument, as it became known after subsequent study, was measured and formally documented. It stands approximately 90 feet tall, runs approximately 490 feet long, and 130 feet wide. Its dominant feature is a series of broad terraced steps, descending in a roughly southwest orientation, 5 main terraced platforms, each with a flat surface and a near vertical face. Adjacent to the main structure, researchers found standing stones positioned upright. Not boulders that fell and happened to land vertical. Upright, isolated, standing. Around the monument's base, examination revealed what appeared to be a channel or road formation running parallel to the main structure's longest face, consistent in width and orientation. Professor Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus has dived the Yonaguni site more than 100 times since its discovery. His analysis, published in peer-reviewed academic journals and presented at international conferences, documents specific features he argues are inconsistent with natural formation. Holes bored at regular intervals in flat stone surfaces, channels cut in straight lines, crossing the main terracing at locations that don't correspond to natural fault or joint planes, and angular transitions between surfaces that exceed the standard fracture angles of the local sandstone. Kimura's position, sustained over 15 years of documented research, is that the Yonaguni Monument is either man-made or substantially human-modified. Its overall morphology, in his analysis, is structurally comparable to stepped pyramid complexes found in Central America and Southeast Asia. The sea level chronology is where the implications become significant. Post-glacial sea level rise data compiled from sediment cores and coral dating studies, including work published by NOAA and the Japanese Geological Survey, establishes that sea level in the Western Pacific rose substantially following the end of the last ice age. Approximately 10,000 years ago, the Yonaguni Monument's current depth of 60 to 100 feet was at or near the ocean surface. The structure was above water during this period. If it was built no later than 10,000 years ago, predating the Egyptian pyramids by more than 5,000 years, Stonehenge by at least 4,500 years, and the earliest civilizations in the recognized historical record by an uncomfortable margin. The mainstream counterargument comes from a source worth noting carefully. Dr. Robert Schoch is a Boston University geologist best known for his work redating the Sphinx at Giza based on water weathering patterns, work that argued the Sphinx was substantially older than Egyptologists claimed, contradicting academic consensus using physical evidence. Schock is not reflexively conservative on these questions. He examined Yonaguni and concluded that the primary terraced body is a natural formation. The local sandstone and mudstone fractures along natural horizontal bedding planes and vertical joint networks under stress. These fractures can produce angular, flat-surfaced features that resemble architecture. The stepped appearance of the monument, in Schock's assessment, is rock doing what this specific rock does under the geological conditions of Yonaguni Island. This is a significant counter-argument from a credentialed and non-conservative source. If Schock, the man who moved the Sphinx's date backward by thousands of years against the establishment, looks at Yonaguni and says, "Natural, that's not dismissible." But Schock himself acknowledges that certain features at the site are anomalous for purely natural formation. The upright standing stones near the monument's base have no geological mechanism that places isolated stones vertically in formation. The channels and bored holes Kimura documented in locations outside natural joint plane orientations don't have standard erosion or fracture explanations. Schock's published position is essentially that the main structure is natural, and that some peripheral features may reflect human modification of a natural formation. This is itself an acknowledgement that organized human activity occurred at this site when it was above water 10,000 years ago. The Ryukyu Islands' indigenous oral tradition, documented by Japanese folklorists independently of the monument in the 19th century, references a sunken land called Nirai Kanai, a civilization that once existed to the southeast, beneath the waves, from which the island's original ancestors came. The tradition predates Arataki's discovery by the entirety of recorded Ryukyuan history. If Kimura is right, someone was constructing stepped stone monuments at Yonaguni 10,000 years ago. If Schock is right, someone was modifying a natural site at Yonaguni 10,000 years ago. Either position places organized human activity here at a time the mainstream record doesn't account for. The monument is still there, the debate is still open, and the water that now covers it rose after people were already there. Number 7. The Dragon's Triangle. September 24th, 1952. You're aboard the Kaio Maru No. 5, a Japanese government research vessel operating in the Philippine Sea between Japan and the Mariana Islands. You are here not to explore. You are here to investigate. In the 2 years prior, 9 vessels operating in this region had disappeared without leaving wreckage, survivors, or distress signals. The Japanese government's response was to send a properly equipped research ship with a trained crew of 31 specifically to study the phenomenon and determine what was happening in this stretch of ocean. You are that ship. You are the answer to the question of why ships were disappearing here. The Kaio Maru No. 5 and all 31 of its crew were lost. No wreckage was recovered. The investigation ended when the investigators vanished. The Dragon's Triangle, also called the Devil's Sea, occupies a roughly triangular region of the Philippine Sea bounded by Japan's southern coast, the Bonin Islands, and the northern Mariana Islands. The zone sits adjacent to the Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth's surface, at 36,089 feet below sea level. Japanese maritime records reference anomalous disappearances in this region, stretching back to the 17th century, and coastal traditions of the southern Ryukyu Islands describe the zone as a place where the sea takes vessels. Contemporary documentation of modern disappearances in the zone was compiled by Charles Berlitz in The Dragon's Triangle, published in 1989, which cataloged over a century of incidents, including the 1950 to 54 cluster. The Japanese Maritime Safety Agency's response to the 1950 to 54 cluster was explicit and institutional. Following the loss of the Kaio Maru No. 5 and the 9 preceding vessels, the agency formally declared the Dragon's Triangle a danger area and issued official navigation warnings to shipping traffic. This is not a fringe designation. It is a government maritime authority acknowledging in formal documentation that a specific region of ocean presents anomalous and unresolved dangers. The declaration stands in the official record. The geological explanation for the zone's hazard is well documented and substantial. The Dragon's Triangle sits directly above one of the most tectonically active regions on Earth. The Pacific Plate subducts beneath the Philippine Plate along the Izu-Bonin-Mariana Arc, producing a chain of submarine volcanoes and associated geological instability across the zone. Methane hydrate deposits exist in significant concentrations in sediment throughout this region, When destabilized by seismic activity, hydrate releases can produce sudden massive methane gas discharges that dramatically reduce water density, a hypothesized mechanism for ship sinkings without recoverable wreckage, since a vessel encountering a hydrate release zone would lose buoyancy catastrophically and sink faster than any distress communication could be transmitted. Magnetic anomalies in the Dragon's Triangle zone are also documented by the Japan Hydrographic and Oceanographic Department. Compass deviation readings from this region show inconsistencies that exceed normal geomagnetic variation for surrounding waters. Navigation dependent on magnetic compass in the pre-GPS era, in a region of documented magnetic irregularity, during a period of elevated volcanic and seismic activity, in a part of the western Pacific prone to rapid weather development from typhoon systems, these factors compound in ways that make the 1950 to 54 disappearance cluster geologically explicable. The mainstream position is that the Dragon's Triangle is a genuinely hazardous but non-mysterious stretch of ocean whose reputation has been amplified by the same pattern of selective documentation that inflated the Bermuda Triangle's legend. The 1950 to 54 disappearance cluster likely reflects a period of elevated volcanic and seismic activity in the region. Modern vessels with GPS navigation, satellite communication systems, and current weather forecasting technology have not disappeared in the Dragon's Triangle at rates consistent with the early post-war period. Improved technology resolved a navigational problem that the mid-20th century didn't have the tools to navigate safely. But the Kaiomaru No. 5 sits at the center of this explanation and doesn't fit. It was not an inadequately equipped commercial vessel caught by bad weather without sufficient navigation. It was a government research ship, crewed by trained government personnel, specifically equipped and deployed to study the disappearance phenomenon in this region. It had the explicit advantage of knowing the zone was dangerous. It had the institutional resources of a national maritime agency behind it. It departed with the specific mission of returning with answers. All 31 crew and the vessel itself were lost without a trace, without a distress call, without recoverable wreckage. If the explanation is weather and volcanic hazard, a properly equipped research vessel with a professional crew, sent during a planned investigation with full awareness of the zone's dangers, should have been able to document those hazards and come back. It didn't come back. The depth of the surrounding ocean is also relevant in ways that conventional disappearance statistics don't fully capture. Wreckage that sinks in the immediate vicinity of the Mariana Trench, the deepest water on Earth, falls to a seafloor that has been visited fewer times than the surface of the Moon. Anything lost in this zone descends to depths where recovery is essentially impossible with current technology. The zone that produces no recoverable wreckage may simply be a zone where everything that sinks falls somewhere completely unreachable. What happened to the 9 vessels before the Kaiomaru No. 5? What happened to the 31 trained crew of a government research ship sent specifically to answer that question? Why did investigation of the zone stop when the investigators didn't come back? And what's at 36,089 feet directly below the most dangerous water in the Pacific? Number 8. Point Nemo. You plot the coordinates on a navigation chart: 48 degrees, 52.6 minutes south, 123 degrees, 23.6 minutes west, the South Pacific Ocean. You draw circles outward from that point in every direction to find the nearest land. North, Ducie Island, a coral atoll in the Pitcairn Group, 1,670 miles away. Northeast, Easter Island, another 1,670 miles. South, Maher Island, off the Antarctic coast, another 1,670 miles. Every direction produces the same distance. This is the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, the single point in the world's oceans that is equidistant from the nearest coastline in all directions. The most remote place on the surface of this planet. In the water here, the nearest human beings to you are not on land. When the International Space Station passes overhead at approximately 250 miles altitude, its crew is the closest human presence to anyone floating at this location. There is nothing around you for 1,670 miles in every direction but open ocean. Croatian survey engineer Hrvoje Lukatela calculated these coordinates in 1992 using ellipsoidal Earth geometry software. Before that, nobody had mathematically determined the ocean's most isolated point. Since then, it has become the world's most deliberate spacecraft cemetery. International space agencies have been targeting deorbited spacecraft to atmospheric re-entry over Point Nemo for decades, because targeting the most remote ocean location minimizes collision risk with any human being on the ground. As of 2024, over 260 spacecraft have been intentionally directed here. The Soviet space station Mir deorbited in 2001, multiple Russian Progress resupply vehicles, European Space Agency automated transfer vehicles, Japan's H-2 transfer vehicles. They are all on the ocean floor at approximately 14,000 feet depth, in an area that no research vessel regularly surveys and that no human has visited in person. We send our spacecraft to die here. The ocean at Point Nemo is biologically near empty. The coordinates sit within the South Pacific Gyre, a slow rotating circular current system covering millions of square miles. Gyres trap water in their interior, preventing the upwelling of cold, nutrient-rich, deep water that feeds marine surface life. Without nutrient upwelling, there is no phytoplankton bloom. Without phytoplankton, the food chain that sustains virtually all ocean life has no base. Marine biology at Point Nemo is so sparse that the primary organic input to the seafloor is marine snow-dead particles drifting down from above and the occasional carcass of an animal that died elsewhere and drifted in. The most remote point in the ocean is also, biologically, one of its most empty. The place we've chosen to bury our spacecraft is an oceanic desert surrounding an uninvestigated seafloor 14,000 feet down. Now, the coincidences begin. In 1928, American writer H.P. Lovecraft published a short story called The Call of Cthulhu, describing a sunken city called Rye on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, home to a vast sleeping entity of eldritch intelligence. He was precise about the location. He wrote coordinates, approximately 47 degrees south, 126 degrees west. Lovecraft was not a cartographer. He was not a mathematician. He was writing pulp horror fiction for a magazine called Weird Tales. The oceanic pole of inaccessibility, the most isolated point in the ocean, was not mathematically calculated until 64 years later by Lucatella using modern geodetic software. Lovecraft's fictional sunken city sits 849 miles from the coordinates Lucatella calculated in 1992. Nobody has explained how Lovecraft ended up that close. In 1997, NOAA's hydrophone network detected the bloop, the anomalous ultra-low frequency sound from number 2, and triangulated it to approximately 50 degrees south, 100 degrees west. The margin of error in that triangulation is not negligible. Point Nemo sits approximately 1,240 miles from the triangulated source point. In the context of an ocean measuring thousands of miles across, these coordinates are in the same extreme South Pacific sector. The most anomalous, unexplained sound NOAA has ever recorded came from somewhere near the most isolated point on the planet, in the same region where Lovecraft placed a fictional sunken city in 1928. The mainstream explanation is coincidence stacked on useful geography. The spacecraft cemetery is there for practical population safety reasons. The biological desert is the predictable result of gyre dynamics. Lovecraft picked coordinates that felt suitably remote, and remote South Pacific coordinates are close to the pole of inaccessibility by definition. The bloop triangulation has wide error margins. All true. All individually reasonable. But there's a particular quality to what accumulates at these coordinates. The most remote point on Earth. The deliberate burial site for spacecraft from 4 space agencies. An oceanic biological void in an otherwise teeming ocean. A horror writer's fictional sunken alien city placed nearby in 1928, 64 years before the location was calculated. The most anomalous, unexplained acoustic event in NOAA's history triangulated to the same sector in 1997, and 14,000 feet of uncharted ocean floor beneath all of it, where the spacecraft go and where we've never looked. What's on the seafloor at the most isolated point on Earth? Why does this location accumulate the things we send to be lost? How did Lovecraft place his fictional sunken city 849 miles from coordinates not calculated until 64 years after he wrote them? And what made a sound near here in 1997 that NOAA still hasn't definitively explained? Number 9. The 52 Hertz whale. The Cold War ended. And with it, the United States Navy began declassifying one of the most sophisticated listening networks ever built. SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, was a Cold War-era array of hydrophones anchored to the ocean floor across the Pacific and Atlantic, designed to detect the acoustic signatures of Soviet submarines in deep water. At its peak, the network could track submarine movements across entire ocean basins with a precision that Soviet commanders never fully understood they were being watched at. When the Cold War ended, the Navy began sharing SOSUS data with civilian oceanographers, who had never had access to this level of deep ocean acoustic coverage before. In 1989, a researcher analyzing the North Pacific data identified a signal that didn't belong to anything in the catalog. It was a whale call. Analysts were certain of that almost immediately. The acoustic profile, the frequency modulation, the duration, the complexity was consistent with baleen whale vocalization. Large baleen whales call in low frequencies because low frequencies travel farthest through deep water and allow communication across thousands of miles. Blue whales call at 10 to 39 hertz. Fin whales call at around 20 hertz. These frequencies are specifically shaped by evolution to be detectable by members of their own species at great distance. The signal identified in the 1989 SOSUS recordings was calling at 52 hertz. No known whale species uses that frequency. None. The signal was tracked and tracked and tracked. It moved across the North Pacific in seasonal migration patterns consistent with a large baleen whale toward warmer water in winter, north in summer, but its specific routes matched no known species' documented migration corridors. It moved at the right times for a baleen whale's annual cycle, but in the wrong directions and along the wrong pathways for any of the species those hydrophones were calibrated to identify. It wasn't a juvenile blue whale still finding its range. It wasn't a documented hybrid. It was something consistent, healthy, and entirely without classification. William Watkins, a senior researcher at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, published the first public paper on the signal in 2004. He had been tracking it since before his death. The paper was completed and published posthumously by his colleagues. Watkins's paper documented the signal's consistent presence across 12 years of SOSUS data from 1989 to 2001. Its migration patterns, its acoustic characteristics, and the straightforward conclusion that no known species produced a vocalization matching this profile at this frequency. He described it as the loneliest animal in the world, though he meant it as a scientific observation rather than a sentiment. Nothing at 52 hertz hears a call at 52 hertz. Every other large baleen whale in the ocean communicates below 40 hertz. Whatever is producing this call is broadcasting into a frequency range acoustically empty of any ears except its own. The signal has been tracked from 1989 to the present, 35 years of continuous calling across the North Pacific. The whale or whatever is producing this is alive. The signal has not degraded in the way a malfunctioning or dying animal's call would. It has remained acoustically complex and consistent, demonstrating the varied call types that indicate a healthy, actively functioning adult animal. It migrates annually. It covers thousands of miles. It does everything a baleen whale does, in a frequency that isolates it completely from every other whale on Earth. The mainstream explanation is a structural deformity. The most widely accepted hypothesis among cetacean researchers is that the 52 Hz whale is a blue whale, or possibly a bluefin hybrid, whose vocal apparatus was altered during development or damaged during its lifetime in a way that pitches its calls upward from the standard frequency range. This explains the otherwise normal behavioral profile. Animals with vocal anomalies are documented in cetacean populations. The deformity hypothesis is clean, parsimonious, and doesn't require novel biology. But a deformity producing consistent, complex, varied calls across 35 years without degradation is a structural anomaly, functioning with remarkable precision. Structural deformities typically produce irregularities. The 52 Hz signal is not irregular. It has been documented producing a full range of complex call types, all at 52 Hz, across 3.5 decades of healthy migration. A physical deformity that reliably and consistently pitches every vocalization to the same anomalous frequency for 35 years, while the animal remains vigorous enough to complete annual Pacific crossings is, at minimum, a deformity functioning more stably than the normal mechanism was designed to. The animal has never been seen, not once in 35 years of tracking. No research vessel, no aerial survey, no drone has photographically identified the 52 Hz whale, despite decades of tracking data establishing its approximate location. We have 35 years of acoustic documentation. We have migration routes. We have confirmed it is alive. We do not have a photograph, a video frame, or a physical sample. It is the most thoroughly documented, unidentified large animal in ocean science tracked for the entirety of the post-Cold War era, never directly observed. What is it? If it's a deformity, why has no other documented blue or fin whale ever presented a deformity this specific and this stable? If it's an unknown species, what does that species look like, and why hasn't a single specimen appeared at the ocean surface or washed ashore in 35 years? Has it ever been aware it was being listened to? And in 35 years of calling across an ocean, has it ever wondered why nothing answers? Number 10. The Deep Biosphere. February 1977. You're a marine biologist aboard the research submersible DSV Alvin, descending through the Galapagos Rift in the eastern Pacific, 8,200 feet below the surface. This is a standard geological survey. You are here to photograph hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ocean floor where seawater seeps through the crust, gets superheated by the magma below, and blasts back upward, laden with minerals. It was expected to be a barren survey. Below 650 feet, sunlight can't penetrate. Without sunlight, there is no photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, the entire food chain that supports life as understood in 1977 cannot function. The scientists aboard Alvin expected to find geology. What they found rewrote biology. The submersible's lights illuminated a garden. Tube worms standing 6 feet tall, white and dense, clustered around the vent openings, giant clams up to a foot long, shrimp in numbers that filled the camera frame, crabs, unclassified organisms stacking up faster than the biologists could process them. All of it thriving in superheated mineral-laden water in complete and permanent darkness, at temperatures and pressures that were supposed to preclude complex life entirely. The team radioed the surface. Nobody on the surface believed them at first. The mechanism that made it possible was chemosynthesis. Instead of photosynthesis converting sunlight into chemical energy, bacteria living in the vent environment were converting hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas vented in enormous quantities by the hydrothermal system, into chemical energy. These chemosynthetic bacteria formed the base of an entire food chain operating with no sunlight whatsoever. Everything above them, the tube worms, the clams, the crabs, the shrimp, was feeding on organisms that fed on chemistry rather than light. The discovery by Jack Corliss, Bob Ballard, and the Alvin crew in February 1977 was one of the most significant biological discoveries in recorded science. It demonstrated that life was not dependent on the sun. It could build entire ecosystems from chemistry alone. The vent environment is not gentle. The water emerging from hydrothermal vents reaches temperatures of 700 degrees Fahrenheit. The surrounding cold ocean water averages 34 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit at that depth. The interface zone, where vent plume meets ocean water, where the temperature gradient creates the conditions life exploits, is a band of extreme thermal variation that should, by the biological rules known before 1977, be sterile. Tube worms of the species Riftia pachyptila, documented at the Galapagos Rift and subsequently at dozens of other vent systems across the world's oceans, grow at rates faster than any other known invertebrate, and live in immediate proximity to the superheated plume. Their tissues are laced with chemosynthetic bacteria that they farm internally for energy. They have no mouth, no digestive system, and no need for sunlight. They are a different model of life from anything biology had encountered before. What the 1977 discovery opened was not just a new ecosystem type, it opened a question about the extent of life in the ocean that has not been closed. Subsequent research, through the 1990s and 2000s, including deep drilling programs by the Ocean Drilling Program and its successor, the Integrated Ocean Drilling Program, discovered microbial life inside the ocean floor itself, not on its surface, but inside the rock, in sediment cores extracted from miles below the seafloor. Living bacteria in deep rock. Active metabolism documented at temperatures of 250 degrees Fahrenheit and higher, at pressures that exceed anything surface biology encounters. The term for this biosphere is the deep biosphere, and by the time researchers completed enough survey work to estimate its scale, the numbers were remarkable. A 1998 study by William Whitman, David Coleman, and William Wiebe, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, estimated the total biomass of microbial life in the deep subsurface ocean sediment and rock below the seafloor at approximately 3.5 to 25 times the total carbon mass of all surface life on Earth. All forests, all grasslands, all marine surface life, all animals, combined. The microscopic life living inside the rock beneath the ocean floor, in conditions considered lethal by every biological rule available before 1977, may represent more total biomass than everything living on the surface of this planet. This reframing of where life lives and what it requires transforms the question of what the unexplored ocean might contain. If life thrives at 8,200 feet under total pressure and darkness, inside rock at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, without sunlight, without oxygen, without any of the conditions surface biology considers essential, then the 95% of the ocean we have not investigated is not empty by default, it is unknown. The assumption of emptiness in extreme conditions was wrong in 1977. There is no particular reason to assume it is right now about the 95% we haven't examined. We have mapped more of the moon's surface than we have mapped our own ocean floor. The moon has been photographed in its entirety at approximately 3-foot resolution. Earth's ocean floor has been mapped at roughly 3-mile resolution for most of its area, the equivalent of trying to navigate a city from a photograph where each pixel represents 3 miles. What we know about the ocean's contents comes from the small slices we've managed to examine. In those slices, we found craft entering the water at 4,800 miles per hour. Sounds bigger than any known creature. Teeth from creatures that should have been gone for millions of years. Disc-shaped objects with right angles sitting on the seafloor. Cities at 2,200 feet. Step pyramids that were above water 10,000 years ago. A zone where ships vanish without debris. The most isolated coordinates on Earth, accumulating impossible coincidences, a whale calling alone for 35 years, and an entire biosphere living in rock beneath the floor of everything, more massive than all life on the surface, entirely in the dark. That's what the part we've explored contains. Subscribe if you want to keep going down. Leave a like if something in here changes how you look at the ocean. And if you're watching this from somewhere near the water, drop in the comments where in the world you're watching from, because the ocean you're looking at goes a great deal further than the horizon.